All right. Greetings, my most esteemed viewers, and welcome to today's episode of the tax series. On yesterday's episode, which by the way was the maiden edition or the starting episode of the tax series, we treated tax identification number. We relied heavily on relevant sections of the Nigeria Tax Act 2025 and the Nigeria Tax Administration Act 2025 to provide clarity on the need to obtain a tax identification number or simply a tax ID as provided in Section 4 of the Tax Administration Act. We also went forward to discuss the implications or the consequences for non-compliance with that express provision of the Nigeria Tax Administration Act, Section 4 of the Nigeria Tax Administration Act. And I believe that what we did yesterday laid a solid foundation for discussions that will follow going forward, still on the issue of tax and related matters. So on today's episode of the tax series, I want us to beam our searchlight on relevant tax authority. Yesterday, like I said, there is need for us to clarify who or what a relevant tax authority is so that we can understand what that provision, Section 4 of the Nigeria Tax Administration Act, is actually saying. I didn't want to lump it up with what we discussed yesterday. So like I promised, we are going to be treating relevant tax authorities as a separate topic for today. But just before we now clarify who or what a relevant tax authority is, let us go back to our reference section of the Nigeria Tax Administration Act 2025. And of course, that is Section 4 of the Nigeria Tax Administration Act 2025, which provides that every taxable person shall register with the relevant tax authority and obtain a tax ID for the purpose of complying with tax obligations. Yesterday, I clarified who a taxable person is. And I said that any person engaged in economic activity from which he earns income is a taxable person and is therefore bound by the provisions of Section 4 of the Nigeria Tax Administration Act. I went further because if you read that section, it now says that you must register, you being a taxable person, must register with the relevant tax authority. So who or what is that relevant tax authority? That is what we are going to be clarifying today. Now, a relevant tax authority is simply the agency of government that has jurisdiction over a particular tax. I think that's just the easiest and most straightforward way to put it. The agency of government that has jurisdiction over a particular tax. I have borrowed jurisdiction from our lawyers. So what do I mean by a relevant tax authority being an agency of government that has jurisdiction over a particular tax? What I simply mean is that a relevant tax authority is an agency of government that is empowered by law to administer a given tax. An agency of government that is empowered by law to register taxpayers into the system of that particular tax, that is empowered by law to enforce the application of that tax, that is empowered by law to receive returns and remittances for that particular tax. So a relevant tax agency or a relevant tax authority is simply that agency of government that has been empowered by law to take charge, to control, to enforce a particular tax. And so, with this understanding, let us now clarify who or what a relevant tax authority is by taking a look at specific tax and the relevant tax authorities that have jurisdiction over them. Like I said, a relevant tax authority is an agency of government that has been empowered by an enabling law to administer a particular tax. To administer a particular tax means that they have the power to carry out registration for the purpose of implementing or enforcing that tax. They have the power to carry out assessment for the purpose of determining the tax payable under that particular tax. They have the power to receive returns, annual returns, monthly returns of the relevant of that particular tax. They have the power, they are empowered by the law to receive remittances from taxpayers for that particular tax. So a relevant tax authority, like I said earlier, is simply an agency of government that has jurisdiction, has control, has management, administration powers over a given tax. So what then are the taxes and who are the relevant or tax authorities that administer these particular taxes? Let us start with value-added tax, which is of course a consumption tax, the burden of which is borne, by the final consumer. Now, by our laws, as of the moment, value-added tax is a federal tax. And that means that it is administered only by the Federal Inland Revenue Service. And that is why when you want to remit VAT, you remit to the FIRS, which of course from 1st of January 2026 shall be known as the Nigeria Revenue Service. Right? So, as far as VAT, value-added tax is concerned, the relevant tax authority, the agency of government empowered by law to administer VAT is the Federal Inland Revenue Service. So, anything about VAT falls within the purview of their administration. And that is why if you want to register as a VAT collection agent, you register with the Federal Inland Revenue Service. When you want to file monthly returns and remit your VAT for the month, you remit it to the Federal Inland Revenue Service on the Tax Promax portal. So, if as a businessman, in the course of this series, we are going to do an exclusive on VAT, because many people do not know that there is what we call the VAT threshold. It is not every business or every organization you see that is empowered by law to legally collect taxes. To collect VAT. There is what we call a VAT threshold. The old law kept that threshold at 25 million. That is only companies who have met the 25 million annual turnover threshold are legally empowered to register for, to collect and remit VAT on all qualifying transactions to the FIRS. So any business name or anybody that is not VAT registered, that collects VAT, is collecting it illegally, and it's an offense under the law. And that is why here in our company, we don't just pay VAT to any and any person. Some people will just mischievously code VAT. They don't even know anything about VAT. They are not VAT registered. They are not empowered by law, or they are not mandated rather by law to charge VAT on their invoices. But they do, and collect it as an extra change. During the exclusive, I am going to be dissecting VAT so that business owners, individuals, you, the final VAT payer, the consumer, can also be properly guided, so that you don't go and pay VAT on something that is zero rated or that is completely VAT exempt, or rather even pay tax to people that are not even VAT collection agents. So, sorry for digressing. Let's go back. So, we'll do an exclusive on VAT where we shall lay bare issues about the VAT threshold under the old law and under the new law and how they affect you as the consumer. So, like I said, it is the Federal Inland Revenue Service that has jurisdiction over the administration of value-added tax. So, the relevant tax authority for VAT is the Federal Inland Revenue Service. So, anything about VAT, filing of VAT, VAT returns, remitting of VAT, registration for VAT, it is the Federal Inland Revenue Service that is the relevant tax authority. Now let us go to income tax. Of course, there are basically two income taxes: personal income tax and company income tax. All right. Now, so who is the relevant tax authority for company income tax? Of course, company income tax is the tax imposed on the incomes of limited liability companies, LLCs. The tax, we call it CIT, company income tax. It is imposed on the taxable profits of limited liability companies. And the company or the tax agency, the relevant tax agency or the relevant tax authority for the administration of company income tax is still the Federal Inland Revenue Service. As a matter of fact, anything about limited liability company, by our laws, sole jurisdiction over limited liability companies is vested with the Federal Inland Revenue Service. They are the ones that register. They are the ones that administer everything related to company income tax. They are the ones that carry out assessments. They carry out desk reviews. If as a company, as required by law, you have done your audit at the end of the year and you have made your returns and paid the relevant CIT, it is the Federal Inland Revenue Service that has powers to do a desk review of your returns to see if they comply with the law and if you have actually paid the right taxes. So the relevant tax authority when it comes to company income by limited liability companies, all right, and other corporate entities is the Federal Inland Revenue Service. Now the other leg of income is personal income tax. Personal income tax is the tax you pay on your income as an individual. So as a salary earner, the tax you pay, and then as a business owner, yes, so the personal income tax covers individuals and unincorporated entities. By unincorporated entities, I'm talking about business names and enterprises. So if you have a business that is registered not as a limited liability company but as a business name, as an enterprise, you are liable to personal income tax, not company income tax, because business names are not companies. They are simply an alias, an alias, or an alias, so to say, of the owner. If it is Samuel that is the owner of Clean Books Integrated Solutions, okay, and you are talking about Clean Books Integrated Solutions under the law, you will say Samuel trading as Clean Books. So it is your business name is just like another name for you, right? So it is not a company, and so it is subject to personal income tax. So who then is the relevant tax authority for personal income tax? The relevant tax authority for personal income tax is the State Board of Internal Revenue of your state of residence. The state where you reside, the Board of Internal Revenue of that state is the relevant tax authority for your personal income tax, for the profits of your business name, your enterprise, your trading that you do. As long as it is individual, you as a person, you are a mason, or you are a bricklayer, or you are a reinforcement expert, or you are an electrician, a self-employed person, you are into petty trading, you are into business that is registered as a business name, the relevant tax authority that must collect taxes, that you must file returns to, is the State Board of Internal Revenue. The Board of Internal Revenue of your state of residence is the relevant tax authority for anything personal income tax. I don't know if you get the clarification. Once it is LLC, Limited Liability Company, it is the Federal Inland Revenue Service. But as long as it is personal income tax, it is the State Board of Internal Revenue that has jurisdiction, with a few exceptions. The exceptions are residents of the FCT, Federal Capital Territory, Abuja. Residents of the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja, because of the strategic nature of the Federal Territory, it is a state and not a state at the same time. So it is the Federal Inland Revenue Service that has jurisdiction over personal income taxes of residents of the FCT. And then members of the armed forces, the military, the police, members of the armed forces, their earnings, their taxes, their personal income tax is still under the jurisdiction of the Federal Inland Revenue Service. Even people in the diplomatic corps, people in diplomatic service, ambassadors and what of those kind of people, they are also under the jurisdiction of the Federal Inland Revenue Service. The non-residents, foreigners doing business, in Nigeria that are not resident in Nigeria, but whose taxable supplies, who makes taxable supplies in Nigeria or to Nigerians, the jurisdiction over their taxes is still vested with the Federal Inland Revenue Service. But besides that, when you come to normal individuals doing their businesses in their states, earning income on their economic activities, the relevant tax authority is the State Board of Internal Revenue. Okay, let us now also look at capital gains tax. Of course, capital gains tax is the profit you make when you dispose of a capital asset. If, for instance, you bought land, okay, some years back for 5 million. After like 5 years, it has appreciated to 15 million. You have made a capital gain of 10 million. So that 10 million gain is subject to capital gains tax at 10%. Now, the relevant tax authority for capital gains tax is dependent on your status as a business or as an individual. If you are an individual actor, maybe you are a person or it is your business name, land bought in your business name or land bought in your name that appreciates over time, then the relevant tax authority in that case is the State Board of Internal Revenue. But if it is a limited liability company that sells their assets and realizes gain, then of course the relevant tax authority is the Federal Inland Revenue Service. Again, let us also look at withholding taxes. Now, withholding tax is an advanced tax that applies at different rates, to different services and supplies of goods and services, within the economy. So withholding tax is simply a tax that is applied on all eligible transactions, okay, and remitted to the relevant tax authority that a taxpayer can now claim as tax credit at the point of paying his personal income tax or his company income tax, right? So who then has jurisdiction? Who is the relevant tax authority when it comes to withholding taxes? Again, it depends. If it is limited liability companies, right, the relevant tax authority is the Federal Inland Revenue Service. But if it is an individual whose income, whose invoice is withheld at the applicable rate, then the relevant tax authority is the State Board of Internal Revenue, right? If maybe you are into masonry, right, and a construction firm like us, we give you a subcontract to do plastering work on some of our projects. The value of that subcontract work, right, is subject to withholding tax of 2%. Now, when we withhold that tax of 2%, we are remitting that 2% to the Bayelsa State Board of Internal Revenue, which is where we are resident and which is where you are also resident, right? You are resident in Bayelsa, doing business in Bayelsa as an individual. When we be told that 2%, we remit it to the State Board of Internal Revenue of your state of residence. Now, like I said, it is an advanced tax. So it is there. When we remit it, the law requires that we give you a receipt showing that, of course, you have this kind of tax credit, so that when you now do your self-assessment by yourself, or when the tax authority assesses you and there is now a tax that you are supposed to pay, then you now simply draw on the withholding tax that we have remitted to the State Board of Internal Revenue on your behalf to defray your tax liability. What that simply means is that if we withheld your money or your income at 2% and it amounted to, say, 50,000 naira for that particular eligible transaction, and at the end of the day your personal income tax comes up to 60,000, what that means is that government already has 50,000 naira of your money. So instead of paying 60,000 to government, you will pay only 10,000. That is the idea of withholding tax. It is an advanced tax that you pay, that is with government. When you are now assessed and you are about to now make the payment proper, right? That money is now already with government, so it is just the balance. If what is withheld is higher than your tax liability, you will not pay 1 naira. If what is withheld is lower than your actual tax liability, you pay only the difference. So that is how these taxes work. So I believe that with the little explanation that I have made, you now understand who a relevant tax authority is, and you now understand how it is divided. Once it is individual or ordinary business name, it is the State Board of Internal Revenue. But once it's a limited liability company, once it is residents of the FCT or members of the armed forces, members of the diplomatic corps, non-resident individuals and non-resident companies, it is the Federal Inland Revenue Service. As for VAT, VAT is exclusively federal. So it is the Federal Inland Revenue Service that has jurisdiction over VAT. Maybe sometime we'll look at local governments. Local governments are not empowered by law to impose income taxes, but they can charge tenement rates, motor park fees and stuffs like that. So on a later episode, we'll look at the ones that local governments have jurisdiction over. So with what we have done so far, I believe that you now understand who a relevant tax authority is. So how does this now affect your tax identification number, as provided in Section 4 of the Nigeria Tax Administration Act, which says that every taxable person must register with the relevant tax authority and obtain a tax ID for the purpose of complying with tax obligations. So it tells us that you have to register with the relevant tax authority depending on the nature of your business and the status of your business. It means that if your business is a limited liability company, or rather if you want your business to be registered as a limited liability company, of course, it is the Federal Inland Revenue Service that has jurisdiction over it, right? So in the context of this tax ID, which authority should you now go to get your tax identification number? Of course, the answer is clear. If you are in paid employment, or you are a self-employed person, or you are operating a trade, a petty trade, or a medium-scale trade, and your business is registered as a business name, then it is the State Board of Internal Revenue that is supposed to issue you a tax ID. Because the law did not specifically say that everybody must go to the Federal Inland Revenue Service to get a tax ID. The law says must register with the relevant tax authority. So if we are to follow the law to the letter, the implication simply is that for people that are salaried people that are business names, operating as business names, people that are in petty trade, the relevant tax authority they are supposed to go to to get their tax IDs is the State Board of Internal Revenue. In Bayelsa State, you can just go to their portal and just click and fill in the details and get your tax ID. They call it BIN, Bayelsa Identification Number. So that in all your correspondences and interactions with the Bayelsa State Board of Internal Revenue, you quote that number. That is the number that they will use to, identify with you in all your interactions with them. If you are in Rivers State, you go to the Rivers State Board of Internal Revenue to obtain a tax ID. But then that brings us to this. So why is there so much rush and so much for tax ID, identification number, issued by the federal government, either through the FIRS or the Joint Tax Board portal? Well, that is actually the federal thing. I call it the Federal Tax Identification Number, right? It is important you have it, because if you have it, you are largely covered under this new provision. Definitely by the time you start interacting with the state, automatically they will generate that one for you. I say so because if you go to most state Board of Internal Revenue portals, if you are filling their forms, there are provisions normally for tax identification number. So the state-owned does not override the federal. So it's okay for you to get the federal. And again, even if for now you operate as a business name and you have not really met the VAT threshold to be a VAT registered business person, because the law empowers or mandates both limited liability companies and business names, unincorporated entities that have met the VAT threshold, to register, collect, and remit VAT. So it is not only limited to limited liability companies alone. Even as an unincorporated entity, if you have met the VAT threshold, you are mandated by law to register, collect, and remit VAT to the Federal Inland Revenue Service. So if your business is growing and you know that for sure at some point you will grow to become, meet the VAT threshold and beyond, it's fine. Go ahead, get your federal, get your TIN. That's your Federal Tax Identification Number. I think it's very, very okay to get it, regardless of the fact that the relevant tax authority for your individual income, profits from your business, which is registered as a business name, the relevant tax authority is actually the state government, the Board of Internal Revenue, not the Federal Inland Revenue Service. That is how it works. A lot of time has been spent on this session. I didn't want it to even exceed 20 minutes, but this is already 28 minutes. So please, we'll pause here. But please, I hope I have not confused you. There is absolutely nothing wrong with getting your TIN, your tax identification number. That is the one issued by the federal government. In the next episode, I will make further clarifications, because you may now be wondering, okay, so I have a TIN issued by the FIRS or by the Joint Tax Board. At the same time, I have a business name registered. Okay, and on the certificate, on the business name registration certificate, there is a tax identification number there. Which one of them is actually my tax identification number? Or like somebody was asking, my business, my company or my business is registered and it has a tax identification number. Do I now need a separate tax identification number? We'll clarify all of these things, in the very next episode. I wanted to treat something else, but because of how lengthy this video has become, we'll pause here. Then tomorrow, I'll now throw more light on these aspects of the tax identification number that I have raised. So please, the bottom line is this. Yes, there are relevant tax authorities. States have jurisdiction over personal income tax, and business names, their taxes and all of that are under the jurisdiction of the State Board of Internal Revenue. And then anything FCT, armed forces, non-resident individuals and companies, and limited liability companies, VAT, are the exclusive preserve of the Federal Inland Revenue Service. So the tax identification number drive is on. Endeavor to get your tax identification number. Like I've said, We offer it. We offer that service at Clean Books Integrated Solutions. We offer it. So if you want us to do it for you, kindly send us a DM. We'll ask for the details we need to get it done for you. But like I said in my previous video, it is something you can do for yourself, and I've dropped the link. So you can click the link and go. But if you don't want that stress, just DM us. We are just a DM away. We'll get it done for you. So thank you for being with us. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Tomorrow we'll continue the tax series. Shalom. Peace.